what would it be like to be an F1 broadcast journalist? Now, if you're watching this video, you already know we have one of the premier professionals in that space lined up for you today, and none other than Will Buxton. Now, for those who are familiar with F1, of course, you know him as their digital presenter. He was also in this teeny tiny little Netflix series called Drive to Survive. Yeah, you might have heard of that as well. Anyhow, Will was kind enough to share some of his time and to give some career insights, for example, how he made his way into broadcast journalism. We also get this really insightful look at, the lead up to a race weekend. What does that flow like? What types of jobs, activities, what's the pacing like? All of that great stuff. And Will also shares a bunch of stories that, oh my God, you're absolutely going to love. Outside of that, there's some really great career insights and advice. So all up, if you're a fan of Will, if you're a fan of F1, or if you're just somebody who's aspiring to get into broadcast journalism, this episode will have you covered. So I think it's about time to jump into things, so why don't we? In terms of like a day in the life for you,
Yes.
I'm interviewing an NFL beat reporter once, and the schedule that he had in terms of covering a professional, American football team was pretty intense during the season. And I'm, obviously with the travel that you have and everything else, I could imagine it being pretty intense as well on your side of the fence. But I'd love to hear this, and I think listeners would love to hear about this.
So let's run through last week or week before last. So Tuesday morning, up at about 5 with my 10-month-old daughter, breakfast and then a bit of play and pack my suitcase, get in the car, drive to Heathrow Airport, and check in for a flight to Qatar, change in Qatar, and fly from Qatar to Shanghai. The car takes us to the hotel and check in there and have some dinner and get ready and get prepped for the week ahead. We'll have done a lot of prep work on the flight and in the days leading up to that as well. A lot of research, hours and hours and hours over the day. Take meetings, Zoom chats and whatever for our meetings on how we're going to go into the weekend. Make sure that you land fully prepped on the history and where you're at in the championship season. Thursday is your first day at the track. We'll get in at about 8 o'clock in the morning, leave about 7 o'clock at night. And throughout that day, your day is filled with interviews of drivers, team bosses, personnel within the paddock, and then also walking around and talking to teams and talking to everybody that really about what's going on with all of the different storylines. So they will be about the track, about the cars and the upgrades, the drivers themselves, how they're feeling, political machinations and what's going on in the sport beyond that. At the moment, we're in the middle of silly season, so literally talking to drivers and their managers about where might they end up next year, trying to get a feel for where that lay of the land is and who might be landing where. And then we film the weekend warm-up show at the end of the day, which is about a 40-minute live show. And then we jump on the bus, which drives us back to the hotel. It was about an hour and a half to the hotel from the track.
Ooh.
Get back, bit of dinner, decompress, play a bit of my guitar. I got a nice travel guitar for my birthday from my wife. So sit on the bed, play a bit of guitar, go to bed. Get up the next morning, and it's a sprint weekend. So again, we're leaving the hotel at 7 a.m. We're into the track for 8:30. Meetings, quick tour around the paddock, chat to people, who's got what upgrades. At that point, the cars are being rolled out into the pit lane for show and tell. So we go to the cars, interview team personnel about the upgrades they've put on their cars for this weekend, head back to the office, quick toilet stop, and then we do our preview show for the practice session. Then I run straight from the preview practice show straight into the pit lane to do an hour of live updates in commentary, showing everybody into the garages, what updates everybody's running, anything that happens during the session, red flags, yellow flags, any issues on the cars. And a lot of that is literally just looking. It's looking in, and you're looking at the car and figuring out what they're working on, because very rarely will the teams ever tell you any issues that they have. So you've got to look at it and figure it out and realize, okay, they've got an issue with the suspension, or that brake shouldn't be on fire, or whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And then as soon as that's done, literally 5 minutes before the end of the session, run out of the pit lane, take my tabard off, and I'm back front of camera for the show that wraps that session up. Then we had a couple of hours where, if you're lucky, you've got time to grab lunch. If not, again, you're touring around the paddock, you're talking to people, you're figuring out how their sessions have gone, who's happy, who's sad, what changes do they need to make, because you're straight into sprint qualifying. So it's a preview show for sprint qualifying. We get that done. And then at that point, I'm up in the office watching the action, because I need to have everything in my head over what's gone on in that hour so I can get back downstairs and then present the post show and try to bring some context to everything that's happened in that. There's then interviews that take place after that. I don't get to do those because they're happening while I'm doing the show. And then we'll leave the track about 7 p.m., 8 p.m., back to the hotel for 9:30 p.m., 10 p.m., bit of dinner, play a bit of guitar, get to bed around midnight, and then up again the next morning at, if you're lucky, you can get up in time to meditate, go to the gym, have a bit of breakfast, and jump on the bus. But if it's been a late one, then you just literally up, shower, dressed, on the bus, into the track, and then you're straight into your sprint. And for your sprint, you have a pre-show, about a half-hour pre-show. The sprint itself, again, I'll be back in the office for that, taking notes, making sure I've got everything in my head down for a post-show. Then there's a 3-hour break, and again, you're running around the paddock, finding stuff out, maybe doing some interviews, but mostly talking. Who's changed what and why? And then you have your big pre-show for qualifying itself, big show, post-show for that. And again, we're out. And then race day itself. Race day is a really, really intense day. And I love it because you have rehearsals, you have a ton of time to walk around and figure out what's going on. I did the driver parade in Shanghai. So that's about a half hour out on the track, interviewing the drivers in front of the grandstands. Really
cool.
Huge buzz, great fun. And then you're straight out of that, straight into your pre-race show, which is an hour. And whether I'm hosting that or I'm a pundit on that, it's probably my favorite time of the weekend, because the intensity is really building up at this point. And there's nothing like a high pressure live TV show. So we will have had meetings and gone through what we want to cover in that 1 hour. And in Shanghai, I don't think any one of the segments that we had was more than 2 minutes long. And you've got to be to your second in order to get out of that and into the pre-recorded package that allows us the time to walk to our next space. Bam, bam, bam. It's a very small crew, where there are only 3 of us on air in China. So intense. It's how do you utilize all those people, and then where do you get? So we start at one point of the pit lane, move to another part of the pit lane. Then we're in another feature, and that gives us the time to walk onto the grid. We'll throw up to the commentary box, which allows us to then walk to another part of the grid, and everything is bump, bump, bump. So it all works, and it's seamless and smooth. And I never carry notes with me. So I have a brilliant producer, Joe. She's amazing. And Joe and I go through the running order before we go on air. So I make sure that I know where we're going before we go on air. And Joe just keeps me honest, and she'll just give me like a couple of word keys so I know where I'm off to next and what I'm talking about next. And that keeps me honest. And then they'll throw to me at the back of the grid. I do an 8-minute grid walk. And for me, a grid walk is all about condensing the entire hour of the show into 8 minutes, so that if you tune in for the last 10 minutes of the show, you get all the information that you need. So again, it's not scripted, it's not planned, but I have 8 minutes of talking constantly about every single driver from P20 to P1, throw to the anthem on time, bam, anthem. Out of the anthem, wrap, couple of interviews, and then the race broadcast starts. And again, we're then up in the office, just making sure that I've got everything in my head before I go down and do a live post-race show. Again, that is not planned, so you can't have a running order for that. That just comes as it comes. Drivers walk on the show, and you're very much in the moment, and you just have to roll with the punches and whatever's coming and just make it happen. You have a baseline skeleton of what you think the show will be and what goes where. and again, you're just throwing the meat onto the skeleton as you go along, and hoping that the thing that
Yeah.
forms at the end looks presentable.
Yeah.
And I love that. I absolutely love
It
that.
sounds fun. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I literally finished the show. I had 5 minutes to make the bus, get to the bus, get back to the hotel, quick shower, 30-minute turnaround, bags onto the bus again to the airport, Shanghai, Qatar, home, and I landed 1 p.m. Monday lunchtime in the UK,
Wow.
back home for
Wow,
hugs and
man.
cuddles. And that was that. Yeah, that's a
Wow.
week. Sorry, I know you wanted a day. That's like a week. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
No,
it's it
that's,
it does it. You're a pinball. You're constantly pinging
it
everywhere, and
sounds like it. Yeah.
it's just it's a buzz, man. It's a buzz.
It sounds like it. And to layer all of this in like in a different country, in a
Mm.
different country each time,
Yeah,
so then you have the cultural elements to all of this that are taking place. Maybe you're just so involved and enraptured with everything going around you in terms of the job that you're not maybe picking up on all of that, but it's there too, right? I mean,
yes, yes, and that's lovely. Is when you get back to the hotel and you're heading out for dinner and you get to experience a little bit
yeah,
of where you are. You can
yeah,
never absorb it completely, and chances are, you know, you won't be staying in the middle of a big city or anywhere that's particularly cool. So you just find your little
yeah.
hangouts that are
Well,
your
it's probably the
places,
people that
and
like your colleagues as well, like that
yeah,
too, like the relationships you
it's a
build with
touring
those
family.
people. Yeah, it
Yeah,
would have to be, right?
I
Yeah.
started as a print journalist way back in 2002, 2003 was when I first started out, really as a junior.
Hmm.
And every kind of door that opened along the way, it's been a case of really just slamming my foot in the door and making sure it didn't close, so that any of the opportunities that were presented over that time, I tried to take, and I tried to maximize. So I've had periods in PR, as you say, periods doing commentary, periods on American television when I was a pit lane reporter.
Yeah.
And that all has culminated through to where I find myself today, working for Formula One, and being the sort of presenter on F1 TV, and getting to do the
Yeah.
Netflix show, and everything that's come about as a result of that. So it's been a really long career, all based in that initial passion, fanaticism,
Hmm.
that dream, that desire to tell stories and to share my love of the sport and its heroes, and the incredible people that work in it with the wider world. And it's been a
A
long,
wild
crazy
ride,
journey.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
loved
Like
every second of it.
I bet, I bet. How could you not? And when I was researching for this, just what you were sharing there, I kind of found out some of those details. Like your interest started when you were around 13, and a bit of a somber note. I mean, it was one of your favorite drivers, and obviously a racing legend in Ayrton Senna, and
Yeah.
his unfortunate passing or sudden passing on the circuit that really sort of sparked something within you to actually go into journalism and actually covering the sport itself. Maybe you could share a little bit about that. I think that was a really interesting point.
Yeah. So I'd been a fan of the sport my whole life. Growing up in the UK, Formula One was, look, it was never the same size as football or rugby or cricket or anything like that, but soccer, I should say. Um, but it was covered. An amazing commentator in the UK called Murray Walker, who was really the voice of the sport for, I guess, a lot of the world, all the way through the 70s, 80s, 90s, until he retired. But yeah, Senna was my hero. He was the guy that got me to fall in love with Formula One, and
Yeah.
he was killed in a race in 1994. And yeah, I was 13 at the time. You're just getting into that stage of your life where you're trying to
Yeah.
figure out what you're interested in and what you want to
That's your
do. And
hero too, right? I mean,
oh, totally,
for a
totally.
13-year-old boy. Yeah.
And my dad bought me a copy of Autosport magazine and Motoring News that week, and I kind of read the pages of that and read what the experienced journalists had to say about the situation. And in that, I kind of found a way to come to terms with the loss of my hero. And it was literally that week, bam, that's what I want to do. I want to write about the sport. I want
Yeah.
to share my love of it, so that somebody who also loves it can read those words and feel that they have kindred spirits out there who understand them,
Hmm.
and and who get it. And that was where the journey began.
Yeah.
And one of my cousins was a writer at the Times, so I spoke to him and said, "Look, what do I do? How do I get into journalism?"
Right. Right.
And he was very supportive and gave me loads of great advice. At the time, your media studies or journalism degrees weren't seen really as very serious degrees. They are now, 20, 30 years later, they're much better tools to teach people the skill set that you need. And in
Hmm.
hindsight, I kind of wish that I had done some proper studying about what you need, because nowadays those college courses or university courses have so much more than just this is how you write. There's media law there, all of the
Right.
complex machinations that you need when you get into this world, dealing with libel and everything else like that.
Hmm.
Things that would have been really, really useful. um but he said, just do a topic, do a subject that you enjoy, preferably a humanities subject where you can write and find your voice. So
Hmm.
I loved history. I was always pretty argumentative and loud and vocal. So I did politics. I studied politics, and I wrote my university thesis on the politics of Formula One, which my lecturers hated, but my kind of heroes over at Formula One magazine, I sent them a copy of the dissertation. They loved it, and they gave me a bit of work experience off the back of it.
There you
And at the
go.
end of those couple of weeks of work experience, I turned up with a pillow and a sleeping bag and sort of refused to leave the office. I said, I'm staying. And they said, don't worry, we were going to ask you to stay anyway. Do you want to be our staff writer? So I was a real junior, right at the bottom,
Yeah.
just up from kind of making coffees. And that was nearly 25 years ago. That was my first job in the
Out of
sport.
here, eh? Yeah. I love that. I mean, there's so much imbued within that story. I think that's useful for young people to hear. It's like, one, what might have been easy when, your university course where your lecturers or your professors like, no, this is garbage. This is no good. It'd
Oh,
be
it was
easy.
terrible.
Just all right, fine. Like I don't have this. I don't have a skill or a talent for it. But you're like, no, no, there's a certain stubbornness, I guess, to you that like, well, you're still gonna like put it out there into the world and see what happens and go right to
Yeah.
that magazine like that. I think that's a point right there that like again it'd be easy to give up there, but you didn't.
Yeah, totally. And I did, I went for jobs at Autosport magazine and other places, and they said, one of the roles I went for was as an editorial assistant, and they said my knowledge was too specialized in Formula One. It wasn't wide enough on motorsport in general. I went for jobs at Radio 5 Live with the BBC and all of that. And, it wasn't the case that the first thing I applied for, I got. I
Yeah.
have, a bag full of rejection letters. And over
Yeah.
the last 25 years,
Yeah.
rejection after rejection after rejection.
Yeah.
You get down to the last two or three for a job. Sorry, you're not quite right for it. Okay. Well, you move on.
Mm-hmm.
I knew what I wanted to do. I think my parents were always very supportive of me in this dream, in this goal, actually, for both my sister and I, in what she wanted to do. She wanted to be an actress. She wanted to be on the West End.
Mm.
And they said to both of us, look, it's amazing you have a dream. You have to realize that the dream you have is very specific and the chances of achieving that are minimal, but you have this passion. We're going to back you. We're going to support you. Please, if you do one thing, go to university, get a degree, get something locked in, so you've got something to fall back on if this
Right.
dream doesn't pay off. But go for it, and go for it with our blessing. And sure enough, I ended up doing this. My sister ended up on the West End in Sound of Music and Wicked and
Oh, get out of here.
all of that. So that
Wow.
was, yeah, kind of.
Wow, there's some
And that's
talent in that
just,
family.
but I think that came from the positive enforcement of
Yeah.
our parents, who
Yeah.
didn't say, "Don't be stupid. That's a ridiculous. Like this, the chances of that are,
Mm-hmm.
infinitely small."
Yeah.
They just said, "Go for it."
Yeah.
And give it your all, give it everything. Because if you're
Yeah.
if you're going to do this, you have to commit to it, and you have to give it everything. But have a backup just in
Yeah.
case it doesn't
Yeah.
work out. And we both did. My sister now teaches, um, and I'm now doing TV, which is really
Yeah.
far away from what I wanted to do originally, which was
Mm-hmm.
which was to write. But that positivity, that real positive enforcement was a huge part of what got me to where I was, and that belief from them in me that I could do it.
Yeah.
And obviously then the belief from those who ended up giving me jobs. So I was very lucky in the early days
Mm,
when I was writing my thesis. I went to the Autosport show. I met David Tremaine, who was a journalist I looked up to massively, who was good enough to give me his phone number and was a constant source of inspiration and support. He put me on to Joe Saywood, who was and still is one of the foremost journalists dealing with the politics of Formula One. And
mm.
I said, I'm writing my thesis on the politics of Formula One, and he sent me this document, which was like 15,000 words on the entire history of politics in Formula One. And my
Oh
thesis
my,
only needed to be 12,000 words.
yeah.
So how I ended up writing a terrible thesis, I have no idea, because I had more than I needed from Joe. Um, and they were both incredibly supportive in those early days. I wrote for Joe's website, grandprix.com,
Yeah.
for free when I was a kid, and David gave me this couple of weeks of work experience, and um that was a real shot in the arm, a real kind of feeling of support, and that I could do
Mm.
it, and that there was a space for me in this thing that I wanted to do.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, it's a certain degree of like gusto, like just going for it as well, like imbued within your own personality, I'm guessing here as well. Like I picked up in the research of, for this talk here that at one point, maybe in your early 20s, like you were going all over Europe in a car, you know,
Yeah.
skimping on food, basic necessities, just to be able to follow the sport, from circuit to circuit, to be able to write about it and to see what was going on, and really fully going after this dream. Like I think I have a quote here or something along the lines of like your vision or your view of whatever your dream was is like you were going to pry yourself into it before that door could
Yes.
close, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
It literally is like, you're hanging on by your fingertips, but
Yeah.
you have to hold on and summon the strength to just drag
Just
yourself
do it,
back up.
right?
Yeah, so I was writing for Formula One magazine, and it got shut down a week before the 2004 season, literally a week before the season started.
Jeez.
So I yeah, I went to see my parents. I was like, what do I do? They said, you can't give up now. You've had a taste of it for 18 months. What
Yeah.
do you need? I was like, I need a pass and I need to get to the races. And so the FIA were very, very good. Richard Woods was their head of communications, and he said, just find an outlet, any outlet, and I'll get you a pass for the season.
Oh,
So I have no idea what he saw in me, but he thought I was worthy of that. And I went to a free newspaper in London, the one that you pick up on the underground. And you leave it on your seat, then the next person comes and read it.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
they printed however many copies they printed, but with the pass on readership, it was hitting millions of people a day. So I was able to go to the FIA and say, "Here's the outlet," and they were like, "Great, you got a pass." And then it needs to get to the races. So my parents had some savings, and again, they put it into a camper van for me on the proviso that I pay them back, which I did over time, over many years. And for that year, I drove to all the races. Couldn't afford to fly, drove to the races, and yeah, I was only earning a couple of £100 a week at that time. And that money went
Going to
predominantly
the
on fuel.
gas.
Yeah, it went on
Yeah.
gas to get me to the races. So it was either gas or food, and I chose gas.
Yeah.
And the other journalists and the teams would feed me at the races, fatten me up, so I'd survive the next 5 days
Till the
until
next
I got to
race.
the
Yeah,
next
yeah,
Grand
yeah.
Prix. And that was how I lived for a year. And at the end of that year, they were launching GP2, which is now known as Formula 2. New championship. They saw what I was doing in the camper van, liked it, thought it was pretty rock and roll. Said, "Do you want to be our press officer?" Because I loved in those days. And still do loved hanging out in the junior Formula paddocks, getting to know the kids coming through their stories,
Yeah.
because these were the ones that were going to define the future.
Yeah.
And so I
Ever.
got to know the guys in the junior formulas, and they wanted me to be their press officer. So I went over, moved to Switzerland, where the championship was based, lived in Lausanne, worked in Geneva, which was scary and terrifying. I was 23,
And so
living
much fun, I
abroad.
bet, though, too, right?
Ah, come on. It was amazing.
Come
It
on.
was
I mean, come
amazing
on.
because
Yeah.
I mean, and Lausanne was a big student town.
Yeah.
So I
Oh,
was
geez.
hanging out with students, but I was earning. So
Yeah.
I had a great time, like a
I
great
bet.
time.
Yeah.
And then I was
That's a whole
living
different
my dream,
podcast,
and
maybe.
yeah, exactly. But living my dream and working and going to races, and uh I was promoted to director of communications in my second year. Did 2 years then as director of communications, and after 3 years, I was like, I miss writing.
Mm,
The PR side of things, it was, you know, in PR, you take the meat off the bones and you
yeah.
give the bones. And as a journalist, your job is to put the meat back on the bones.
Right.
And I was more the person that wanted to put the meat on the bones than take it off it. I didn't like
Yeah.
holding the truth back or being,
Yeah. Yeah. Inject
only
your
sort of part.
opinion and your feeling and
Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. And when the boss is like, this is what we have to put out in the world, and the journalist side of me is like, but that's not true. It didn't sit easily with
Yeah.
me. So,
Yeah.
so I loved it. It was a wonderful 3 years. It taught me so much, particularly about, that other side of the coin. So when I went back to journalism, it was really easy to kind of figure out what had been left out and work your
Mm,
way back around to put the meat back on the bones. But a huge part of the process, a huge part of learning the job, learning the world, but also getting to know teams, drivers who
I was
would
about to
come to
say.
define the future of the
Yeah.
sport. Fred Vasseur, who's now the Ferrari team principal, he ran
Mm,
one of the junior teams there in ART, along with Nicholas Tutt, who has become one of the most influential driver managers of the last 20 years. I worked with Lewis Hamilton. I worked with Nico Rosberg. I worked with these guys when
yeah.
they were kids coming through the
Yeah.
the ranks.
Yeah. Yeah. Didn't you
And
get
then
like the first interview with Verstappen? Like at
so
Spa, wasn't it? Like
yeah. So
based
when
off of that
Max,
sort of approach.
so
Like you had an existing relationship with him when he was quite
a
young.
kid, yeah,
Yeah.
and that was really good. And for a long time, I ended up commentating on GP2 when I went back to being a journalist. And being the lead commentator for GP2 meant that I'd spend a lot of time down in the paddock
Hmm.
getting to know these kids. And sometimes, if they got up to Formula One and graduated to Formula One, I was kind of a familiar face. So I would be an easy first
Yeah.
interview for them when they got out of the car. They knew I wasn't going to rip them to shreds. I wasn't going to softball them, but they knew that,
Right. There's
yeah, I
something there.
wasn't,
There's a
yeah,
relationship.
they
Yeah. Familiarity.
bingo. And so that was really, really, very, very positive. So those early formative years were key. And but actually, we talk about those early formative years and what they taught me. And you were very gracious at the start to sort of talk about how I approach things and that enthusiasm and that passion. I
Yeah.
When I lived in the camper van, I was camping with all the fans. So when I came back from my day of work, it was back into the campsite, sitting around the campfire, having a few beers, chewing the fat about the day.
Yeah.
And their questions and what they wanted to know were fascinating because I was meeting people from different walks of life, different countries, and everybody wanted to know different things, but on similar subjects. And
Mm,
so my job then was not only to go in and write for the newspaper, but to come back with stories that they wanted to hear and those facts. And that's kind of informed everything I've done since, which is to remember that ultimately the fans in the campsites or the fans back at home, I'm still what
yeah.
I was then and have been my whole life, which is a fan who got incredibly lucky to get to do this thing that I love. My job, as I see it, is to bring all the other fans in with me and to say,
Hmm.
come and see this thing and let me show you the things that you want to see and the things that you want to know and let me take you on this tour and let me share it with you.
Yeah.
That's what I've always seen as my job to to
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Like
to to allow them access into that, because the paddock is the place they all wanted to be. They all wanted to go, and
mhm.
you can't buy a
Yeah.
ticket to get in there. Only if you're working. And so my job was to bring them all with me.
And I don't know if this is a story that you'd like to tell again. You probably told it like 8 billion times over about being in the was it the Ferrari Junior Academy like training like
Yeah,
yeah, and you're racing with current contemporary drivers like Max Verstappen, Lance Stroll. I think he was your teammate, and
yeah,
Nicholas
yeah. That was.
Latifi as
I mean,
well.
listen. Over the last 20 odd years, I've had some amazing experiences as a result of doing this crazy job. Got to drive a Formula One car a couple of times.
That's crazy.
Been to every corner of the world, done some mad stuff. But yeah, getting invited to go and compete in open wheel against the best up and coming young drivers was crazy because I was pretty old at the time. I was in my mid 30s.
Okay.
And here's all these 15, 16-year-olds who were just,
Yeah.
the next generation. And
Yeah.
as it turned out, quite incredible racing drivers. Um, Particularly when you look at someone like Verstappen, who it was obvious from the outset was something very, very special indeed. Um, yeah, little kind of Formula 4 cars, Tatus F4 cars, and I was massively off the pace. My first session, I'd never raced anything really in my life other than
Nothing.
go-karts with mates. No, nothing. So I was like 18
Oh
seconds off in the
man.
first practice session.
Going from that
And then
into
gradually cutting my time down over the weekend. And I think
yeah.
my fastest race lap in the end was about 2.5 seconds off max, which I'll take. I'll take that.
Wow. What? Yeah. Hell yeah.
But it was what was really good was at that time I'd been commentating for years. I'd been reporting for years, and I'd spoken about things like dirty air and, getting
Mm,
flag on your tires and slipstreams and downforce and all those kind of things.
yeah.
And I got the theory. And it's easy to, you do your commentary with the theory in mind. And this is what we know it looks like on the screen and the effect that it has on the drivers. But to actually be in the cockpit
Mm,
and the first
experiencing it.
time that you're getting faster and faster and faster, and then your engineer tells you can go way faster through that corner. Like I literally can't. They're like, that's what the wings are for. Just trust me. You can go like 20 miles an hour faster through the corner. So you do,
Yeah.
and you're like, and the first time, and then it sticks, and you're like, oh the wings are actually working. This is what it's supposed to feel like.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's on rails. Okay, now I understand downforce.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then I had to pull off line to let the guys lap me. And I had to pull onto all of the bits of rubber. And then I came back on it, and the car's just bouncing up and down like this. Okay, now I understand what dirt on your tires feels like. Or if I flat spotted a tire and that get that same vibration
Yeah.
going down the
Yeah.
the straight so you can't see. Okay, now I understand what a flat spot is. Feel slipstream for the first time. Okay, now I know what that feels like. Started raining and I'm on slick tires and it felt like I was on an ice rink. Okay, now I know what that feels like. So all of these things that were just theory
Mm-hmm.
suddenly started to become real. And that gave me such a massive appreciation of things I'd only ever spoken about, but never really fully, properly understood.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. I mean, like on the professional side, definitely. Like everything you just explained there. On the personal side, like what a thrill that must have been.
Ah,
You know? You
amazing.
know? Reliving
Incredible.
in and
Yeah.
telling these stories and looking back, like at some point when you're hanging out all of this, and reflecting on the career and all that you've been part of, like some of those moments, man, yeah,
Yeah. And
they're gonna be
I
special
listen, I
ones.
will talk about those for years.
Yeah. Was there
Because
anything? Is there anything else that stands out outside of that story, or really
oh
quickly?
my goodness. I mean,
Probably
there's
tons, but
just I mean tons. I remember one of the nicest things I did was when I was still a print journalist. Uh, uh I managed to convince F1 Racing magazine to send me to Brazil to do an interview with Bruno Senna, who was Ayrton Senna's nephew.
okay.
Um, and he was making his Formula One debut. And so I'd go to Brazil to interview Bruno. And I went out there, and Bruno said, "Do you want to go to the farm?" And I was like, "Yes, I want to go to the farm because there is only one farm in the Senna family, and it was Ayrton's." So we
Mm,
went to Ayrton's house, and I'm literally hanging out in Ayrton Senna's house with his nephew, eating lunch.
and
And then Bruno's like, let's go look around. And so we went down to, this lockup that he had there, which was full of Ayrton's old stuff and his jet skis. And then we went to the kart track that Ayrton had built. And then there were all these barns full of old go-karts, and I recognized Ayrton's go-kart from photographs I'd seen 20, 30 years before, covered in an inch of dust because they'd sat there untouched since his death. And just that for me, it was like this full circle moment of the whole reason I got into the sport. And I was literally just there at his house, hanging out with his nephew, who I got to know through GP2 and had become a good mate.
Yeah.
And now I'm
Unreal.
reporting and writing the story of his nephew about to make his F1 debut here at Ayrton's house. Like that was like talking
Wow.
about that now. It's like it's all
Yeah, that's
yeah, just
goosebump
like
material, right? It's
goosebumpy.
unreal, man. Unreal. Yeah.
That was crazy. I thought my career was over when the magazine was shut down at the start of '04. Doing the year in the camper van, I didn't think I'd last longer than a year. Every single step, I've been incredibly grateful and just assumed that it wouldn't last. So there will come a point where I sit down and I go back over everything that's happened.
Yeah.
But really every day
Yeah.
is a memory that I never thought I'd get to have.
Yeah.
And I cherish them all.
Yeah, I'm definitely picking up on that. And I'd reckon that's a, a big part of your success, perhaps, is that because I think again, like it'd be easy for someone who's reached, the point at which you've reached in your career right now, like you're up there, you're up on that hill, and it might be easy for somebody just to be like to rest on their laurels a little bit there, and or allow it even worse to go to their head, and lose touch with reality. But it seems to me that you're constantly reflecting on a lot of these things and not losing touch with that 20-year-old self, who was
I try
completely
not to.
enthralled. And well, like I think it comes across, and like at least in this conversation and in following your
Thank
career a
you.
little bit here as well, like I think it comes across on air and how you engage with others. Like I think it's at least this is again
That means a
something I'm
lot. No,
picking up on
thank you.
here.
That means a lot. Yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah.
guess if you think it's going to end,
Yeah.
every single day,
Yeah.
then you just
Well,
make the most
it's
of it.
like
It's
you study any of the greats of any sport, the greats of anyone in any profession. It's that type of humbleness as well, I think, and respect for the craft that you can always be a little bit better, and that's
oh,
what ultimately pushes
good,
people forward, right?
1000%. It's
Yeah,
there are so many great broadcasters that that I look up to, and when you see them do what they do and make it look so effortless,
yeah,
um, and then you go and you do your own thing, and I would never want to compare what I do with with the people that I look up to, but you get your own little taste of it, and then
yeah.
you realize, oh wow, okay, they are another level, and how
Mm,
do I get there? And one thing that's really important is, I watch back every single thing that we do. I watch back everything. Try to find, okay, rewatch it, even the bits that make you cringe and go, oh, that was, yeah, I remember that bit. Wasn't happy about it then, even less happy with it now. And you got to go
mm,
back, you got to rewatch, you got to constantly learn and from the good bits and the bad bits. Don't get too confident on the good bits. Just be like, okay, yeah, that worked. Remember that for the future. And the bits that didn't work, okay, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? What can I change? How can that be better in the
yeah,
future? It's she said it's craft, and everyone talks about the what is it, 10,000 hours
yeah, yeah.
that you have to put in, and but you can't rest. The second that you rest on your laurels, the second you phone it in,
Hmm. It
listen,
shows.
it does show, and we are in an environment now with the amount of incredibly skilled content creators that exist in the wider world of social media, be they TikTok creators, be they on YouTube, whatever their platform. There are so many skilled content creators that if you don't bring something that is genuine into the marketplace, you get sniffed out very, very quickly. You
Hmm.
cannot bullshit your way through it. You have to be on your game at all times. You got to care about it. And if you don't care about it, go and do something else.
Yeah.
You've got to work. You have to work. It's so key.
Absolutely. And, really quickly here as well, like in preparing for this, conversation today, we were speaking off air. I think I'm up to about 124, 125 episodes now. And I get this email about an hour before this is going to go off that you had joined the Zoom chat early in all of these episodes. Not one guest has done that. And it had me freaking out a little bit like, oh, did I mess up the time zone here? But no, it was like, it was you just going, like you shared with me, you just want to make sure the mic was good, the computer was good. Like it's that attention to detail as well, and like caring enough to do these types of things. And I think that again speaks to the point that you're just making, you know, and like the dedication to, you know, what you're all about and who you are. Yeah, yeah, I like it. I think these are all the
Thanks,
reason I
man.
bring a lot of this up is like well, I think a lot of this is like incredibly important information or insights for young people. You know, like there's no easy way, there's no shortcuts to any of this, right? It's
No,
kind of put out there that it's like that, but reality,
it's
anything
it's
but, you
hard.
know.
It's
Yeah,
really hard. But it's the same. I think it's the same as any job, any
yeah,
role. You get out of it what you put into it,
yeah,
and you know, if you phone it in, you're going to get to the end of it and think, well, I could have done that better, and I
yeah,
didn't really get any satisfaction out of it.
yeah,
You've
yeah.
It's all about the
Well,
work. So I sometimes get asked, you know, for some advice on how to get into broadcasting or get into journalism, how you can set yourself apart. And the one thing that I've always said, um, and that I try to share with people is that the greatest strength you can ever have is something you already have, and you don't need to learn it, and you can't buy it, and it's your own voice. That's it. You already have everything you will ever need. And so long as you're true to your voice and you don't try to sound like anyone else, you don't try to write like anyone else, you don't try to be anyone else, just be you and be completely authentically, unapologetically you, then you've got everything you'll ever need.
really quickly too, I know you have a book coming out, and maybe you want to
I
plug
do.
that as well.
I do. Grand Prix. It comes out
Yeah,
a little bit
yeah.
little
There
bit
you
later
go,
this
man.
year. I was I've been very sort of mindful over recent years with Drive to Survive that the fan base of Formula One is booming.
Oh yeah.
But this is a fan base which has been brought in through this great series, and thrust into a quite complex, at times quite negative social media space where they are maligned as being new fans.
Hmm.
And we all have been new fans at a certain point, whatever the sport is we love, or the band that we love, or whatever. You know, there was a time when we heard that first song by our favorite artist and we knew nothing about them. There was a time when we caught our first game of whatever it is, the sport that we love, and we had no clue about what it was. I, there was a time when I had never watched a Grand Prix.
Hmm.
You can't just invent
Yeah.
knowledge. You can't invent the history of watching it. And Formula One has a huge 75-year history. So how do we bring the new fans up to speed with 70 years of stuff they've never seen? And that was the idea behind the book. So it is a easily digestible, I hope, guide to what is Formula One today, how does it work, the basics, the rules, all of that kind of stuff. And then we go back through history and we do every single decade. And it's literally how did the decade evolve from a technical standpoint, you know, the technical rules and regulations, the drivers, the teams, the politics, the media landscape, the calendar. And then we look at every champion that was crowned during that decade, teams that define the decade, and a great race from that decade. And we do that for 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all
Oh
the way
man.
through to today. And then we look at the modern era of the sport, and then we look a little bit to the future about what might be coming a little bit down the line. But you know,
Yeah.
each champion's kind of write up is it's only 400 words, so it's like a 2 minute read. So let's say
Okay.
you're online and you're talking
Yeah.
about the greats, and someone goes, oh yeah, well, you know, of course you're a Verstappen fan, you're a new fan, you know, I'm a Jim Clark fan. You might never heard of Jim Clark. Okay, so flick through the book, get to the Jim
There you
Clark
go.
page. 2 minutes later, you've got the basics.
You know it.
And so that's the hope, is that it sort of draws people in and brings to life this incredible history of this amazing sport.
Oh man, it sounds awesome. It must have been such a joy for you to put it together.
Loved it. Not so much for my wife. I started writing it on honeymoon. So so that was good. She's very
You got to
understanding.
keep her. We'll
Long
put it
yeah,
that way.
mate.
Yeah.
long-suffering, very understanding wife. But yeah, so I really hope everyone enjoys it. We're launching it, later this year,
Okay.
August
Is it
in
on
the
pre-order
States.
yet?
It is. Yeah, you can pre-order
Okay.
it wherever you buy your books from. Anywhere in
Okay.
the world. It's on, Amazon and Barnes
Yeah,
and
I'd love a
Noble and
link
all
for
those kind
that.
of places. So yeah, it's there, available for pre-order. And it's getting
Awesome.
translated into different languages as well. So hopefully into whatever
Yeah.
language it is that you want to read it in.
So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and hey, I mean, if you want a little bit more, there is the audio version, which does contain a bit more than this video. So you can find the audio, the podcast version, wherever you access your podcast. Just do that search for Life as a ... And while I do have your attention, I would love a like or subscribe. It's the best way to let this algorithm know that this content matters, that it should be put in front of people. Anyway, I will have a new profession covered coming at you right next week, so don't miss it. All right, we'll see you then.